Welcome back to Module 2 of Pillar 1. And in this module we're going to be focusing on the triune brain. And if you remember from Module 1, we briefly spoke about the triune brain being these three levels: unconscious, subconscious, conscious. So we're going to go through that in a little bit more detail and help you understand how each of these work. So here's what we're going to cover. We're going to cover the three levels of the brain, which I briefly went through with you in the foundational knowledge module. The main drivers of the brain, which might be interesting for you to know. Concept of intuition versus instinct, and often how we get those confused with one another. The reticular activating system in the brain, which will be quite interesting for you to have some awareness of. Welcome back to Module 2 of Pillar 1, and we're going to be focusing on the triune brain, which I briefly went into some detail on in our first module when we spoke a little bit about the foundational knowledge. So we're going to explore a bit about what this all means. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the three levels of the brain. So I'll go into those in a lot more detail than I had in the previous module. I'll be talking about the different drivers. So the main drivers really of the brain, so what drives what, which you might find interesting. I'm also going to be looking at intuition versus instinct, because it's all going to be very important for you to understand all these different pieces as we keep navigating forward. And oftentimes the confusion that can occur between these two pieces. And lastly, we're going to focus on something called the reticular activating system, which is governed by the lower part of the brain in the brainstem. Let's get started with the first one. So the three levels of the brain. So we'll explore this in a bit more depth. So we have three levels of the brain that I mentioned before: the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, the neocortex or the cortex. The reptilian brain is the part of the brain that sits right at the base of the brain. It's your brainstem and spinal cord. That's what it consists of. It's often referred to as the unconscious mind, and it is responsible for all the automatic functions in the body, like your heart rate, your blood pressure, your breathing, all the muscle reflexes in the body, digestion, hormone regulation, you name it. It pretty much is responsible for everything. It also has a focus on survival and controls our fight, flight, or freeze responses, amongst many, many other things. Then we have the mammalian brain, which is the next level up. So the mammalian brain is what all mammals have, and this sits in the middle of the brain and consists of the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. So these are just different names for different parts of the brain right in that center. It's often referred to as the subconscious mind, and it is responsible for subconscious emotions such as fear and joy, and also processing memory. And a lot of our learned behaviors and conditioned responses are all really been governed through that area to some degree. Our purpose, part of our purpose, our potential, where we're heading, our value system, etc., is kind of driven in some ways, not in complete totality, but in some ways from that area of the brain. And then the final part of the brain is called the neocortex or the cortex, which is the rest of the brain. So it's the remainder of the brain and consists of multiple different lobes. So you've got multiple different ones. If you've ever seen a picture of a brain, that's kind of what the neocortex or cortex is, with highly differentiated functions. So all these lobes have different things, do different things. The base of the brain, not completely at the base, right at the back of the brain, just above the brainstem, is an area called the occipital lobe. That's responsible for vision. Then you've got various other lobes that are responsible for a whole bunch of other different functions. So that was just an example of one. So it's often referred to as the conscious mind, and it is responsible for deductive reasoning, decision making, executive function, visual learning, and so much more. So you've got so many different levels of the brain, so many different pieces working together that often don't always work very, very well together, but they all work together at some point or another. And they're very important to understand in terms of why they're all there, what they all do. So this is a video that would be worth taking some time to watch now. It's called the three brain model, so the triune brain. And it'll just briefly go through some of the details of the brain. I'll just talk through some of the bits and pieces that aren't necessarily explained, but they're worth exploring at this stage. So our brain structure can be divided into three layers, like I mentioned: neocortex, cortex, subcortical region, which is the mammalian brain, and the brainstem, which is your unconscious mind. So like I said, they're associated with all those different pieces: the reptilian, mammalian, and the primate and human phases, which is the neocortex. So, like I mentioned before, the reptilian brain is made up of the brainstem and cerebellum. All reptiles have this part of the brain and shares a similar function to crabs, lizards, and so on. Like I said, it's responsible for survival and maintenance, regulates heartbeat, breathing, and so on, and it's about safety and avoiding harm. And we feel peace when this need is met. When it's not met, we experience fear, which is usually related to instinct. In the mammalian brain, the subcortical region, it's like the little mouse part of the brain. So emotions and thoughts and everything's processed. It's responsible for feelings and memory, emotions, learning and memory, reward and motivation are its core functions. Its basic need is to get satisfaction and feel rewarded. We feel contentment when that need is met, and we experience a load of frustration and a lot of emotional reactivity when it's not. And lastly, we have the neocortex, or the cortex. It's larger, it's the most sophisticated part of the brain, and as it's mentioned, it's tripled in volume over the last 3 million years of evolution, so it's expanded and grown in size. It's responsible for higher mental functions, many things: regulating attention, feelings, desires, complex reasoning, abstract thoughts, imagination, language, or even empathy. Its basic need is to feel connection and attachment to others. When it's met, we feel love and connection. When it's not met, we experience heartbreak, heartache, and disconnection. So just a little bit more detail about this three-brain model and how it all works. Now let's talk about the main drivers within the brain. So we've got a couple of different pieces. We've got the conscious brain. So this is the part of the brain that is heavily involved, which we've spoken about, with a lot of conscious action and control, but is only responsible for handling a very small fraction of what comes through the senses on a second-by-second basis. So if you remember from Module 1, I spoke about the 11 million bits of information per second, out of which 40 to 60 bits is processed by the conscious brain. That's roughly 0.0004 to 0.0005% of what's happening per second your conscious brain is aware of. Just think about that for a second. Think about everything you've ever gone through, every challenge you've ever gone through, everything you've ever experienced, and then put that into perspective. Because that's all that your conscious brain is aware of per second of anything that you've experienced, both past, currently in the present, and anything you'll experience again in the future. The subconscious and unconscious brains, they're involved with everything that happens behind the scenes. We have no conscious awareness of what these brains are doing, unless we do work to bring it to conscious awareness. But they control a massive percentage of the information processed by the brain every second. So that's roughly 99.9995 or 99.9996% of the information that's coming through per second is processed by the rest of the brain. So there's way more information about an experience than meets the eye. So I'll give you a very just quick example of that. This reminds me of a course I did many years ago with relation to kinesiology, a technique that I still sometimes do when I'm working with someone in person. And I went to the seminar, and the lady was talking about the seminar. She's speaking to a bunch of practitioners like us, and she told us of a story of another seminar she was delivering on this technique to a bunch of other practitioners. And she was doing a demonstration on the stage with this one practitioner and helping him understand what his challenges are in relation to his angers and frustrations and resentments. And using the kinesiology process, she was able to uncover a past moment in his life that related to him perceiving that his dad was abusive towards him. And so he shared this with her, with the audience. She did whatever work to help him resolve it through the body, and then they all went to lunch. His brother happened to be sitting in the audience, who was older than him, went up to her during the break and said to her that he was there at this particular event where his younger brother perceived that he was being abused by his father. And what he proceeded to tell her was quite interesting. He said to her, we went on a camping trip as a family. And we got there, and after a night or two, whatever it was, they were sitting around a fire, roasting marshmallows, all having fun. And his younger brother was mucking around and being silly, and he got too close to the fire, and his clothes caught alight. And his dad quickly got up, and he went and grabbed a massive blanket from the car, or wherever they were, pushed him onto the ground, obviously because he was on fire. So this all happened very quickly, within seconds. Pushed him down onto the floor, covered him with a blanket, and was beating him with a blanket, obviously to beat out the fire. Now, the only thing that this kid remembered, which became the story of his life and the resentments he held towards his father for years, decades, was that his dad was abusive towards him and hit him. So this is what I mean when the conscious brain can only process minute bits of information per second, and the rest is not even made aware of to the conscious mind. It's processed inside the brain. So there's always a hidden order, like I mentioned before in the first module. There's always something under the surface that's wise for us to actually help bring into conscious awareness so we can see the full picture, the whole picture. Okay? Now, I often talk about who's the driver of the car of our life and who's the GPS. So who is the one telling us where to navigate and who's the one actually driving. So we often believe that the main driver is the conscious mind, and that it has all the guidance and all the directions and everything. But it doesn't have enough of the picture to clearly know what it's doing or where it's going. And often when we listen to the conscious brain, the thoughts, not the feeling, we'll most commonly get ourselves in hot water. And you can probably think of many experiences in your life where you've ignored that feeling inside and listened to your conscious brain instead and got yourself into shit. The rest of the brain provides the guidance and knows the way forward, but like I said, it's often ignored and overlooked. So this leads us to the next part of Module 2. The higher mind and the lower mind. So the higher mind consists of everything above the unconscious parts of the brain. This refers to the subconscious and conscious parts of the brain. The lower mind consists of everything below the conscious and subconscious parts of the brain. That's what we refer to the unconscious parts of the brain, that's the reptilian brain, like I've mentioned before. The diaphragm in our body, so the diaphragm that helps us breathe, is what actually represents the separation, embryologically and neurologically, between higher brain function and lower brain function. So how does it relate now to intuition versus instinct? So sensory, so the feelings versus the thoughts. So intuition is governed by the higher mind and is often felt above the diaphragm and sometimes into the head. Instinct is governed by the lower mind and is often felt below the diaphragm and is usually tied to fear, not necessarily higher order function, and is commonly referred to as gut instinct. That's what that is. Gut instinct refers to instinct, doesn't refer to intuition. So when you say, I trusted my gut, or I went with my gut, the truth is that you may have, potentially, listened to the fear and went into avoidance. So we want to listen to intuitive prompts, the sensory feelings that don't have any emotion attached to them, that often don't make any logical sense at all, actually, and to follow those directions. Because that's the information. Remember I said that's the information that your conscious brain can't comprehend. But it's the part of the brain that's always going to guide you along the best route, along the best path to help you achieve the best outcome. So instinct versus intuition. So I thought I'd just put this cool little image to describe it. So instinct is primitive. That's why you can see little baby steps. Primitive. Intuition is higher order function. So it's light bulb moments. It's sensory sensation. It's not emotion. Instinct is fear-driven. Intuition is based on questioning, doubt, hesitation, which isn't fear-based. Something doesn't feel right. Something feels off. I'm not sure if I can connect with something. Instinct is, I feel scared. I don't want to do this. This could threaten my survival if I jump out of this airplane with this parachute that doesn't look like it's been packed properly. There's a good chance I'm going to die, as an example. That's fear, which is instinct. Intuition is higher order function. And lastly, we want to talk about the reticular activating system. I love talking about this to people because it's super interesting. Now, super interesting in the sense that our brain is governing a lot of the actions that we take on a daily basis, which lead to the outcomes. So if we understand what the brain's doing, then oftentimes we can then know how to navigate moving forward a little bit more easily because we've got more insight. So the reticular activating system is able to control what incoming information or stimulus or stimuli you're aware of so that you'll be motivated to behave in a certain way. It's the brain's information filter. So I often use the case of the red car as an example. So let's say you wanted to buy a new red car and had been thinking about it for a while, researching it for a while, been online on the website, played around with different wheels and different configurations and so on. And you've been doing that for at least a few weeks. The brain will use the imagery that you've been working on and focusing on to make sure you filter all of that through your senses every single day to ensure that you see that red car everywhere you go. I remember when my wife was pregnant with our first child, our son, we were obviously doing a lot of research around prams and cots and baby stuff. And every time we walked to the shops from our apartment at the time, all I would see everywhere I went were prams. Different prams. And all the different ones we were looking at, actually, not the other ones. My brain filtered out all the crappy ones and filtered in all the ones that were more expensive because those are the ones we were actually paying more attention to. So your brain will filter in where you put attention. So how does the reticular activating system and human behavior work together? When human beings have been conditioned through past experiences or have learned behaviors that they haven't shifted yet, what the brain will do, and this is happening automatically without you having any conscious control over this until you learn to change it, the brain will continue searching and filtering in multiple situations over your lifetime to ensure and to allow that conditioning or learned behavior to continue to be expressed, which is part of the reason why you might attract the same type of partner into your life over and over and over and over again. Why you might attract similar situations at work. Why you might attract similar financial challenges. It's what your brain has learnt Consciously, you might not like it, but the rest of the brain doesn't actually have an opinion. It just does what it's told. So if it's learned that you need to be in debt, as an example, it will keep looking for situations or creating or manifesting experiences that will ensure that you stay that way, because it's fulfilling something that it's learned. That's all it's doing. But you can teach it to do something different. And that's what we're going to be focusing on over the rest of this program. I love this quote by Tony Robbins because it encapsulates everything that I was just talking about. Where energy flows, so where energy is moving, that's where attention goes. Energy flows where we put our attention. So if we put our attention on all our conditioning and all of that stuff, because that's what our brain's learned until we learn how to change it, that's where the energy will flow to. When we learn how to change it, shift it, change perspective, reprogram the way the brain's firing and functioning, energy flows in a new direction. So we're going to spend a lot of time focusing on helping you navigate into new territory, by helping you shift perspective, by helping you change some of your conditioning, some of your learned behaviors and your patterning, so you can navigate forward with your life the way you would love to. So, there is a resource that you can download around the Triune Brain, so explaining a little bit about what we've just spoken to, so you can have that, so you understand all these different parts of you, and you can always kind of go back there and go, oh yeah, that's my reptilian brain that's doing that. Oh yeah, it's my neocortex that's doing that. Oh, it's my mammalian brain that's doing that. So you can download it, the PDF below, so you can always have it with you if you need to get back to it or use it as a resource from time to time. So anytime you see this slide, this is your action slide. Ready, set, action. Now, the outcomes of this program are going to be largely dependent on how much action you take and how committed you are. I can give you tools, I can give you strategies, I can give you guidance. We're going to get on group calls shortly so we can go work through things together. But the outcome of this program and the speed at which you get the outcome is going to be dependent on how much action you take. The quicker you take action, the better. The slower the progress. So this is really entirely up to you. So anytime you see this slide or you see this anywhere in the program, this is an opportunity for you to get into action and start doing some work. Or it might be an action to download a resource that you can use at a later date or throughout the program if needed. So today's action step is to download the Triune Brain PDF so you can have it available for you and have it with you whenever you need it so you can refer to it and even share it with other people who you think might find it interesting. Okay, so download the Triune Brain PDF below. This is us for Module 2 of Pillar 1, and I will see you in Module 3 very soon. See you in there.